Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're going to be focusing on something pretty important today, something most people don't even think about, but it's actually everywhere. We're going to be diving deep into the world of copper.
Yeah, copper. I mean, it's so fascinating how we sort of take it for granted,
Yeah.
But it's a pretty crucial metal. We'll be looking at copper production and consumption, especially here in the U.S., using this USGS report from January 2025.
It's true. I bet most listeners don't realize just how much copper they use every day in their homes, their cars, probably even in their pockets right now.
Exactly. And get this, in 2024, copper prices hit an all-time high.
Wow. Okay, so before we get into all that, let's set the stage a little bit. Our report says that U.S. mines produced about 1.1 million tons of copper in 2024.
Right.
It's actually down about 3% from 2023, but it's still worth a hefty $10 billion. Now, one thing I always hear about with copper is Arizona.
Ah, yes. Arizona, the copper state.
So what makes Arizona so special when it comes to copper?
Well, it's pretty simple, really. Arizona produces a massive 70% of all U.S. copper. Seriously, 70%.
Yep. It's got these perfect geological formations just loaded with copper deposits. Plus, they've had a lot of investment in their mining infrastructure over the years.
So it sounds like Arizona is kind of like the Saudi Arabia of copper, then.
Huh. Yeah, I guess you could say that. But it's not all just massive open pit mines, though. The U.S. actually has something like 25 copper mines across the country, plus all the smelters and refineries. And then you've got hundreds of manufacturers who are using all that copper to make all sorts of products.
That brings up a good question, then. Where does all that copper actually go? What are we using it for?
Well, think about the stuff you use every single day. A huge 42% of it goes into building construction.
Oh, yeah, all that copper piping and wiring in our houses.
Exactly. And the wiring doesn't stop there either. Another 23% goes into electronics, things like smartphones, laptops, you name it.
Makes sense. What else?
Well, transportation eats up about 18% of copper production, mainly for wiring and other components in vehicles.
Oh, yeah, all those electronics in modern cars. Right. And the rest is pretty much split between consumer goods and industrial machinery.
So yeah, copper really is everywhere. Okay, but here's the thing. If copper is so essential and we're producing so much of it, why were prices still skyrocketing in 2024?
Well, that's where things get a little more complex. You see, even though U.S. mine production decreased a bit overall, there's a lot more to the story than just that top-line number.
Interesting. Okay, tell me more.
Well, for example, take the Bingham Canyon mine.
The one in Utah.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest copper mines in the whole world, and their output actually went down in 2024.
Really? Why?
It wasn't because they ran out of copper, though. They actually had to make some changes to their mine plan, prioritizing safety and stuff.
I see.
And then there's the Eagle Mine in Michigan, which also had a dip in production. That was partly because they hit some lower quality ore. And unfortunately, they also had to deal with a mining incident. Oh, wow. So even if we've got tons of copper underground, things like safety issues and the quality of the ore can really impact how much actually gets produced.
Oh, absolutely. It really shows how complicated the whole copper supply chain is.
That's fascinating.
But it's not all bad news on the production front. Actually, some mines did really well in 2024. Take the Robinson mine in Nevada, for instance.
What happened there?
Well, they actually managed to increase their production. They got some smart people to work on the mine sequencing and ended up hitting some higher grade ore, which gave them a nice little boost.
So it's a mixed bag, some mines up, some down.
Pretty much. And another thing to consider is that refinery production actually increased in the U.S. in 2024.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There's a brand new secondary copper refinery in Kentucky, and there's a new smelter in Georgia that's supposed to be up and running pretty soon. So that should help boost the refining capacity even more. That's encouraging. Okay, but let's circle back to those record copper prices for a minute. In May of 2024, the COMEX copper price, which is, the benchmark for copper globally, that hit an all-time high. And for the entire year, the average price was projected to be $4.20 per pound. That's up 9% from 2023. What's driving such a huge surge?
Well, there are a few factors at play. First off, there's this growing concern in the market about potential global copper shortages down the road. People are worried we might not have enough copper to meet demand in the future.
I see.
And then at the same time, there's a really positive outlook on the global demand for copper, especially from China. Their manufacturing sector is booming, and they need a lot of copper to keep it going.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And then there's also the fact that inflation has been easing up here in the US. That's playing a role in pushing prices up, too.
So it's like this perfect storm of factors, both global and domestic, that are all pushing those copper prices higher.
Exactly. And it raises an important question. Even though the US produces a lot of copper, does it actually produce enough to meet its own needs?
That's a great question. I'm going to guess the answer is no.
You're right, it doesn't. The US relies pretty heavily on imports to meet its copper needs. In 2024, we actually imported about 45% of the copper we used.
45%. Wow, that's a lot more than I would have guessed. So where are we getting all this imported copper from?
Well, most of the refined copper comes from Chile. They supply a whopping 65%.
Wow, 65%.
Yep. Then we've got Canada at about 17%, and Mexico chips in around 9%. Now, for other types of copper, like concentrates or scrap, the sources are a little more spread out. Some of that comes from Canada and Mexico, too, but we also get some from places like Finland and Malaysia.
Okay, so we've got domestic production, we've got imports.
Yeah.
But what about recycling? Doesn't that play a role in all this, too?
Oh, absolutely. Recycling is a big deal when it comes to copper. It's becoming more and more important. In 2024, we recovered a lot of copper through recycling, like what we call old scrap, which is basically copper from stuff people have already used. That gave us about 150,000 tons of copper.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. And then there's new scrap, which is like the leftover stuff from manufacturing processes. That yielded a much bigger number, something like 720,000 tons.
Wow, that's a huge amount.
Yeah.
So all that recycling was really help offset our reliance on imports, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's estimated that recycled copper provided around 35% of the total U.S. copper supply in 2024.
So basically a third of our copper needs are being met through recycling.
That's amazing.
Who are the big players when it comes to copper recycling?
It's mostly brass and wire rod mills that are doing the heavy lifting. They're responsible for around 85% of all the copper we recover from scrap.
That makes sense. They're already working with copper as their main material anyway.
Right.
Okay, we've been talking a lot about the U.S. side of things, but what's happening with copper globally?
Well, globally, the numbers are pretty mind-blowing. We're talking about 23 million tons of mine production in 2024.
23 million tons.
Yep. And around 27 million tons of refined copper production.
Wow.
The top producers are Chile, China, and the Democratic Republic of Congo.
So they're really dominating the market.
They are. And as for reserves, it's estimated that the world has something like 980 million tons of copper just waiting to be mined.
That's a lot of copper.
Yeah.
But with the demand for copper constantly increasing, are we at risk of running out anytime soon?
That's a good question, and it's one that experts are always looking at. You see, while those reserve numbers look pretty big, the ore grades are actually declining in a lot of places. That basically means we're having to dig up more and more rock to get the same amount of copper.
Oh, I see. So even if we know there's a ton of copper down there, getting it out might become more difficult.
Exactly. And that can have some pretty big implications for costs, energy use, and, the environment.
Right, of course. It's not just about how much copper is there, but also how sustainably we can access it.
Exactly. And you can't forget about the geopolitical side of things either. Some of the biggest copper-producing countries in the world, they're dealing with some pretty serious issues like political instability, resource nationalism, even conflict in some cases.
Yeah, that definitely adds another layer of complexity to the whole thing.
Oh, yeah. All these things can really disrupt the supply chain and cause those prices to jump around like we saw in 2024.
So it sounds like there are a lot of moving parts to keep track of. And I'm guessing the demand for copper is only going to continue to increase.
That's the general consensus, yeah. We're seeing more and more demand from those emerging economies. Plus, there's a lot of urbanization happening. Big infrastructure projects are popping up everywhere. And we can't forget about the shift to renewable energy either.
Oh, yeah. All those solar panels and wind turbines need a lot of copper, right?
Absolutely. And so do electric vehicle charging stations and basically the whole electric vehicle infrastructure. So all these things are pushing the demand for copper even higher.
So with all these concerns about supply and demand and geopolitical risks, wouldn't it make sense to start looking for alternatives to copper? Try to find something else we could use instead.
There are definitely some efforts underway to do just that, yeah. People are looking into copper substitutes and trying to develop new materials like aluminum, for instance.
Okay, so aluminum could work in some cases.
Yeah, it can be used for some things like radiators, cooling systems, even some types of electrical equipment. And then in telecommunications, they're using more and more optical fiber instead of copper wires. And, plastics are showing up more often in plumbing these days. We're even seeing titanium and steel being used for certain types of heat exchangers.
Wow. So it sounds like there are a lot of potential contenders out there, but I'm guessing copper still has some unique advantages that make it hard to replace completely.
Oh, absolutely. Copper has some incredible properties. It's just an excellent conductor of electricity and heat. Plus, it's really resistant to corrosion, it's durable, and it's highly recyclable. So while those substitutes might be a good fit for some applications, copper is still absolutely crucial for many industries.
I see. So it's not necessarily about one material winning over the other, but more about finding the right material for the right job.
Exactly. Sometimes copper is going to be the best choice because of its unique combination of properties, and other times substitutes might make more sense, maybe because of cost, weight, or some specific performance characteristic they have.
It sounds like the future of copper is going to be shaped by this whole mix of factors, We've got technological innovation, we've got those geopolitical things we talk about, and we've got responsible sourcing practices too.
You got it. It's going to be a really interesting time for the copper industry. And it's going to require everyone to work together, the producers, the manufacturers, us consumers, even policymakers. We all have a role to play in making sure we have a secure and sustainable supply of this essential metal for everyone, for years to come.
This conversation has been so insightful. I'm starting to see copper in a whole new light. It's not just a metal, it's a critical piece of our modern world, and it's facing some pretty serious challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, I'm glad you're finding this as fascinating as I do. Copper really is a remarkable material, and its story, it's definitely not over yet.
Before we move on, I wanted to circle back to something we touched on earlier about the social and ethical implications of all these advancements in mining and recycling. Like, as automation becomes more common in mining, what happens to all the workers?
That's a really important question, and it's one we need to be thinking about carefully. I mean, whenever you have this kind of technological disruption, there's a chance that some jobs might be lost.
Yeah, I can see that.
But there's also a chance to create new jobs in areas like data analysis, software development, robotics maintenance, that kind of thing.
So it's not just about jobs disappearing, but also about retraining and preparing people for these new types of jobs that are emerging.
Exactly. And it's not just about jobs either. We also need to think about how all this new technology is going to impact those communities where mining takes place, especially in those regions that are really dependent on mining. How can we make sure that everyone benefits from these advancements? How do we make sure nobody gets left behind?
Those are really important questions. It just highlights how the future of copper isn't just about technology or economics. It's about people, it's about communities, and it's about our shared responsibility to create a sustainable future.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about production, consumption, recycling, the challenges and opportunities facing copper, and all the different global forces at play.
And we've really only just scratched the surface.
I know, right? There's so much more we could dive into. But for now, I guess we'll have to leave it there. I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of copper. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring the really fascinating world of copper and its impact on all our lives.
Yeah, and as we wrap up our exploration here, I think there's one more important thing we should talk about: investment.
Oh, right. Yeah. Investment. So where is all the money going in the copper world? And what does that tell us about, what the future might hold?
Well, on the production side of things, there's been a lot of investment in new mining projects, especially in countries like Chile, Peru, and the Democratic Republic of Congo.
So the top producers are really stepping up their game.
Yep. And it's not just about, making the existing mines bigger. There's also a push to develop some new technologically advanced mines that can operate, more efficiently and sustainably.
Yeah, that makes sense. Got to stay ahead of the curve when demand is so high, right? What about recycling? Are we seeing a similar kind of investment boost there?
Oh, absolutely. Recycling facilities are upgrading their equipment and processes all the time. They want to recover more copper from all that scrap metal, and they want to do it in a way that's more environmentally friendly.
So it sounds like innovation is happening on both ends of the copper life cycle, from mining to recycling.
You got it. And there's a growing understanding that we need to invest in both areas if we want to have a secure and sustainable copper supply down the road.
But it's not all about building new mines and recycling plants, right?
Yeah.
Don't we also need to be investing in research and development?
Exactly. We need to keep investing in research to explore new mining techniques, to develop those advanced recycling technologies we talked about, and, to keep looking into those copper substitutes as well.
So it's like a multi-pronged approach, investing in production, in recycling, and in innovation. Sounds like a pretty solid recipe for success in the copper world.
I think so. And it's encouraging to see that both governments and private companies are recognizing how important copper is, and they seem to be willing to put their money where their mouth is.
One thing that strikes me is this. We've been talking about copper in terms of tons, pounds, dollars, all those numbers. But it's easy to forget that behind those numbers, there are actual people, real people.
Right.
The miners, the factory workers, the people who work at the recycling centers, the engineers, the scientists, all these people are part of this incredibly complex web that is the copper industry.
That's such a good point. It's really easy to get lost in all the data, all the technical details, but at the end of the day, it's people who make this whole thing work, And it's those people with their hard work, their ingenuity, and their commitment to coming up with new solutions, it's those people who are going to determine what the future of copper looks like.
Well said. Okay, so, folks, that's a wrap. Our deep dive into the world of copper has taken us from the mines to the refineries to the scrapyards, even to the research labs.
We've looked at its history, what we use it for, the challenges it's facing, and its amazing potential.
And we've learned that copper isn't just some metal. It's this essential thread that's woven into, pretty much every aspect of our modern world.
That's right. I mean, think about it. From the buildings we live and work in to the devices we use every day, copper is there. It's powering our lives in ways we don't even realize most of the time.
Absolutely. And as we move towards, hopefully, a more sustainable future, copper is going to continue to be super important. It's going to be there, connecting us to the energy sources, to the technologies, and to the infrastructure we all depend on.
That's for sure.
So next time you see a copper pipe or a copper wire, heck, even a shiny penny, take a second. Really think about the journey it's taken to get to you and about the impact it has on your life.
Yeah. And remember that ultimately the future of copper is up to us. If we make informed decisions as consumers, if we support businesses that are doing things the right way, and if we encourage innovation, well, we can make sure this incredible metal continues to benefit everyone in a sustainable way for a long time to come.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's our show for today, folks. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of copper. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.